From MMA legends who fell off to unprepared rookies in their debut fights, some of these athletes simply didn't deserve their shot at the championship. So here are the most undeserved title shots in UFC history. And we're starting with a fight that was hyped up as the Super Bowl of the MMA, but was the exact opposite. Of course, I'm talking about Georges St. Pierre's TKO win against Prodigy. What was advertised as the biggest bout in UFC history wasn't a fight at all. At UFC 94, Georges St. Pierre successfully defended his welterweight title by dominating BJ Penn for 4 rounds, and he was ready to go on to the 5th before the fight was stopped by a ringside doctor. If it was going to be more of the same defense play by Penn, then he did us all a massive favor. This whole pairing was ironic, considering Penn used to be considered the master of submission at the peak of his career. Yet, he spent the majority of the match on his back rather than his own feet. At one point, even his corner threw in the towel once he realized how one-sided this match was. And to be honest, the fact that this event even went ahead was insane. Because while Penn was a talented fighter, he was not on the same level as St. Pierre. The last time these two faced off was in 2006. St. Pierre won by a decision. This time, he took it to the next level. He cut Penn's nose in the 2nd round before landing 2 powerful jabs to the face in the 4th, all while his opponent struggled to land even one meaningful blow. Penn had not fought at 170 pounds in almost 3 years, despite being the defending UFC lightweight champion. So the result was still understandable. Even then, these two weren't the most disappointing pairing to come out of the octagon. Chael Sonnen and Jon Jones gave them a run for their money at UFC 159. When Dan Henderson was abruptly forced out of his light heavyweight title fight with Jon Jones in 2012, the UFC was left with no choice but to look elsewhere. And Chael Sonnen was more than willing to volunteer when they were forced to scramble for a contender with no advance notice. The American gangster hadn't competed at 205 pounds in more than 5 years. Not only that, but he was also coming off a defeat to Anderson Silva in their eagerly anticipated rematch for the middleweight title. But as always, Dana White realized Sonnen and Jones would bring in major viewership and went ahead with the fight anyway. Sadly, Jones had other plans and quickly declined the fight, leading to the event's complete cancellation. The simple solution would have been to schedule a future match between Jones and a worthy opponent. Instead, the promotion chose to delay the fight and even dedicated an entire season of The Ultimate Fighter to building up to it. Talk about capitalization. With the rumors going around that Bones had dodged the fight, fans were hyped, especially after Sonnen's tough coaching assignment. But it quickly became clear during the fight that Jones' claim that Sonnen was a threat to him was absurd. He knocked the wrestler to the ground early in the fight and continued to pummel him until he was knocked out via TKO in the 1st round. And if you thought that was anticlimactic, wait till you hear about the next few fights. Because Frank Trigg and Matt Hughes' clash at UFC 45 in 2003 was just chaotic. While the last two fighters were experienced in multiple weight classes, Trigg was just inexperienced in the UFC. And while it may be difficult to believe now, Frank Trigg faced Matt Hughes for the UFC welterweight title without ever having competed in a single fight for the organization. Sure, he had a decent 12-2 record outside of the UFC, and yes, most of these wins were impressive. It still doesn't explain how an unknown fighter could get a shot against the big dogs that quickly, that too as the main event of the night. But like the majority of other title fights on this list, it was because no one could sub in for the fight. Hughes had dominated the competition in the promotion by winning 5 fights in a row. But the fact that Hughes and 2 of the other top fighters in the weight class, Robbie Lawler and Pat Miletich, trained together, this made the situation even worse since they refused to compete against each other. Still, when it came down to it, Trigg had a decent start. Unfortunately, he just couldn't keep up with the veteran fighter as Hughes quickly repelled the attack, and in less than 4 minutes had Trigg in a rear-naked choke. In hindsight, the promoters should have thought the pairing through. Of course, it wasn't the first time they've pulled something like this. And Bigfoot Silva's clash with Cain Velasquez just 10 years later was the same. Bigfoot was hammered mercilessly by Velasquez in his debut UFC match and was beaten into a bloody pulp. And honestly, I just want to know what was going on in the promoter's mind when they came up with this brilliant idea. Yes, Silva was going through a bad slump, but he did make a strong comeback after successfully eliminating Alistair Overeem and Travis Brown. Although stunning, the Overeem victory was completely unexpected. Due to the UFC's limited alternatives in the heavyweight division's often weak competition, Bigfoot got a title opportunity versus Velasquez just 1 year after their first meeting. But when the two met up again, Velasquez eliminated Silva even more quickly, and this time, the match didn't even reach 90 seconds. At least Silva can find comfort in the fact that his rivals weren't doing any better too, because the Brock Lesnar and Randy Couture fight at UFC 91 was just a train wreck. At UFC 81, Frank Mir, the former heavyweight champion, quickly knee-barred Lesnar into submission, and considering the fighter on the ground was a massive crossover star from the WWE,
you go back to the drawing board every day in the workout room. No excuses. He's a top-notch jiu-jitsu guy. He got me tonight. He's a better fighter.
The UFC wasn't going to allow a minor setback to stop the flow of cash. So in the next UFC match, Lesnar won by a unanimous decision against Heath Herring before going on to face Couture for the heavyweight championship. And he used his weight advantage to bully Couture around the ring. The poor man had no way of defending himself against the most experienced fighter, and in the second round, Lesnar defeated the natural by a technical knockout.
Better. This performance wasn't the best. I made some mistakes. I got caught, but
with over a year layoff,
I think the way we train, it's so with a big shot.
At least Randy and Bigfoot had the excuse of being rookies. I don't know what business Frankie Edgar had at UFC 156. Because after losing back-to-back fights for the lightweight championship against Benson Henderson, Edgar moved up to featherweight and was given an opportunity at Jose Aldo right away. Over the years, the answer has been involved in a lot of fights that were too close to call, and this one was no different. It went the distance, and Aldo received votes from all three judges. Edgar went through one of the most brutal fights of his career.
It's a close fight. I keep finding myself in these situations, and that's what it is. Congrats to Jose. He fought a great fight. Yeah, I'm just going to go home and, take some time. That's all.
And it would have gotten the trophy of the most undeserved title shot if it wasn't for Diaz and St. Pierre butting heads at UFC 158 that same year. Everything about this event resembles a soap opera. At UFC 143, Diaz lost to Carlos Condit for the interim belt as St. Pierre battled a knee ailment. GSP defeated Condit when he came back and was supposed to fight Johnny Hendricks, but instead, Diaz was chosen when he returned to the sport after a suspension. The fight turned out to be simply another 25-minute struggle, and Diaz resigned after being unhappy with the outcome.
I figured I'd go on top with it. I don't know how I saw it coming. I thought that was kind of funny, but like I said, I don't want to make excuses. I think I'm done with mixed martial arts. I want to help my team and try to find something. Look at I'm tired of getting banged up like this. I've been doing it for a while.
Talk about fumbling with the bag. Well, there you have it. These were the most undeserved title shots in UFC history.